Okay, Rabbi Isai, Yesher Koyach, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to Take 2. This is the 57th episode of Megillat Esther. You know how long I'm teaching this for? You know, like in the first classes, I don't think I have a white hair in my beard. Because of course we do a little bit of every year. Right? Some years we get 3 or 4 classes. If it's a leap year, we get a little more. And we've been doing this slowly but surely. B'chol Eifen, at any rate, eventually we are going to finish the entire Megillah. We are in the 9th chapter. We're studying the first part of verse 27 today. It might take us 2, it might take us 3. I'm not sure how many classes it will take us to get through verse 27. A weighty, very weighty chapter, verse I should say. So before I begin, let me acknowledge and thank our sponsors, Les and Iris Friedman, who are commemorating the yahrzeit of Les's father, Tzvi ben Yechiel Halevi. May his neshama have an aliyah. And my apologies for our late little start. Sometimes the technology doesn't exactly behave as you want it to. But Baruch Hashem. We are live and ready to rock and roll. So let me tell you what we're going to do tonight. But I'm going to kind of introduce the verse at large, just introduce you to verse 27, and I'm also going to divide the verse into, I think, 3 brackets, 3 segments, so that we identify what needs to be explained, and then we'll have an explanation, like the direction that we're going, and then after we get a direction of where we're going, then we're going to go back to get the details of the precise verbiage of the verse, as we will explain. Okay, so just to bring everybody up to snuff, if you're joining us for the first time, like I said, this is the 57th episode on Megillat Esther, and the story is already past us. We got introduced to the setting, and then the characters kind of took their places. Events began to unfold. At a certain point, when the Jewish people were very, very comfortable and very settled and very accultured, very much a part of their environment, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, suddenly there was this explosion of anti-Semitism. And all of a sudden, people wanted to kill all the Jews, just like that. And the queen was Jewish. We had clout. We had a chief rabbi who was a parliamentarian, and none of that really mattered all of a sudden. We had made so many tremendous contributions. The rabbi who was a parliamentarian even saved the king's life, but none of that mattered. And we realized that there's something else going on here. So we started doing tshuva. When we started doing tshuva, and that was orchestrated by the leadership and the brilliance and insight and the inspiration of Mordechai and Esther, and we started doing tshuva and we returned to Hashem, then Esther set this incredible plan into motion, which had like no statistical chance of working even halfway, but it worked not only halfway, it worked like a time and a half. And everything went extraordinarily. Next thing we know, Haman is hanging. The king has totally changed from becoming the enemy of the Jewish people, who said, "Oh, you want to kill the Jews? Sure. Don't even bother giving me your money. I'll do it for free." That very same king becomes our greatest protector. The chief rabbi, the Rebbe, becomes the prime minister. And it's an amazing turnabout. And now, in the latter part of the 9th chapter, we're in the midst of understanding how Purim becomes a holiday for posterity and how its message is enduring. It becomes an inherent part of Judaism, and it will be so forever. So we heard about the celebrations that erupted, but then the question is, will this continue? Will these celebrations be something that happen year after year after year on an annual basis, or is it a one-time? It's like a one-off. And in this particular episode, we will start to understand and appreciate the real story of Purim. And when I say the real story of Purim, I mean the real spiritual story of Purim. I'll throw this out there just as like a kind of a surprise thing. The average person will tell you that the story of Purim is the story of God as our Savior. God as our Savior, even when we don't see the presence of God in our lives. And I will tell you that the story of Purim is not about God, but it's about us. It's about we, the people, who embrace the message of God, and as such, not only brought forth a tremendous profusion of spirituality and holiness and miracles, but we ratified our position and our relationship with God for eternity. And that's really the story of Purim. Because a lot of miracles happen to the Jewish people. So why this one we keep celebrating? Most of the other miracles, we don't even know the date they happened. And they're of no particular relevance in today's day and age, even if they take their place in the Hall of Fame of great events and miracles. But this holiday has to be made and acted upon, and it has been, for Jewish communities in far-flung places, and time and again. And Purim seems to touch a chord with people. And the question is why? So we're going to really have a panoramic view of Purim and see how it takes its place in the sweep of Jewish history, and why the holiday of Purim is such an important thing, why it's so important for people to celebrate, and why its message is not only that Hashem is to be found in every time and in every place, even if we can't see His presence overtly, but that the contribution of Purim makes a lasting imprint on each of us. We are different people. We are a different Jewish people because of Purim. We were changed forever by these events, and that's what we're celebrating, and that's what we're commemorating, and that's what we're trying to bring to life all over again. Now, that sounds like a whole lot of gobbledygook. That's good, because we didn't really explain anything yet. But if you will come back to this at the end of the class, you will say to me, oh, now I know exactly what you meant. So let's put that on the back burner, and let's begin our actual study. Verse 27, the Megillah says that Mordechai and Esther wrote the story down, and they sent it throughout the Jewish world. And that's where our narrative picks up. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. Now, the term Kimu v'kiblu in English, you know, in some English translations it says that the Jews established or accepted. In other English translations it says that they confirmed or undertook. In some translations it says they irrevocably accepted upon themselves. I mean, clearly there's an indication of some kind of confirmation in the embracing. The Jewish people are embracing. They're embracing this idea, these ideas, this holiday. They're embracing it. So Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim. The Jewish people are ratifying this. There's full buy-in. And who? This is aleihem, upon them. Ve'al zaram, and upon their progeny. Va'al kol hanilvim aleihem, and all those who might attach themselves to them. The word livui literally comes from the term attachment. The first time we have this word is when mother Leah names her third child Levi. She says, Hapam, now, Yulava ishi elai. My husband will attach himself to me. So they accepted upon themselves. They ratified, affirmed, and accepted this upon their generations, their children, and those who attach themselves. And the obvious question is, I know who they are. I can imagine if I know who they are, I probably know who their children are. Who are these attachments? Who are the people who attach themselves? So the Ibn Ezra says, Hanilvim, the ones who attach themselves, Hey Magerim, these are the converts. The obvious question is, a convert is just as Jewish as anybody else. Some of the greatest Jews in history were converts or children of converts. What difference does it make if somebody is a natural Jew, born Jewish, or somebody converts and becomes Jewish? It's exactly the same thing. We don't have to say that every Jew must read the Shema, even those who converted. What do you mean? If you convert, you're Jewish. If you're Jewish, you have to do all the mitzvahs. What is Ibn Ezra trying to say? And I'll just put it out there. If it means the converts, if it means the Gedim, then why wouldn't it just say that? Val kol ha-Gedim. It should say Alehem, al Zaram, val ha-Gedim. So Rashi says, Hanilvim Alehem, those who attach themselves to them, is a futuristic thing. Gedim ha'asidim lihizgayer. These are the converts who eventually will attach themselves to and join the Jewish people. Now, the words of Rashi are really taken from the Targum Sheni. The Targum Sheni says, in the regular Targum it says about Hanilvim, those who attach themselves to them, it says, Kimu v'kiblu Yehudayin, alavehen, v'alavei b'neihen, v'alaveh kol diyarei d'mitaisfen aleihen. Them, their children, and those who will add themselves to them. It doesn't say clearly convert. If you look at the Targum Sheni says, v'al kol giyuraya d'mitaisfen aleihen. So this is what Rashi's saying. Rashi's saying it means, and I guess this is what Ibn Ezra meant to say, the converts who will attach themselves to the Jewish people in the future. But again, isn't that obvious? Of course. If somebody's going to become a convert, they're going to become obligated in doing all the mitzvahs. If somebody's not going to become a convert, he's not obligated. What's the chiddush? What's the novelty? So the Vilna Gaon, in his commentary, kind of elaborates on this a little bit, and he says the following. Kimu v'kiblu ha-Yehudim, the Jewish people accepted this upon themselves. What is Yitzi asking? I'll get to your question in a minute, Yitzi. So the Vilna Gaon says like this. The people accepted upon themselves to do these extra mitzvahs, to listen to the Megillah, to give the gifts of food to a fellow, to find two poor people and to give them a special gift, and to have this meal or this special feast. And lest you think, what's the big deal of having a feast or a meal? There is a big deal. Here, this year, for example, it's Erev Shabbat, and the right thing to do is have a meal in the morning so that Shabbat, Friday night dinner, does not get overshadowed, because we're not supposed to be taking two different events and conflating them. And yet, all kinds of people are giving me pushback. I'd have to have two meals for. I asked one of these people, I said, if you had a daughter that you wanted to make a bat mitzvah for, and a daughter that you were making a wedding for, we said, why do I have to invite everybody 2 times at the same event? We'll make a bat mitzvah and we'll make a wedding. What's the problem? And would you do that? And a bat mitzvah is no obligation whatsoever. So would you do that? They look at me horrified. I said, So Shabbos doesn't matter. Purim doesn't matter. Either both don't matter, or one doesn't matter, or they half don't matter. Oh, put them together. 2 for the price of 1. So it is a big deal. Take upon yourself, it's Friday, people take off work, they have a meal. And most people can't stuff their faces twice so fast, any time in between. So it takes time. It's a big deal. Why did they accept it upon themselves? The first year, I know why they celebrated. They just got saved. Why should they continue doing this for the rest of their lives? How many people do you know that if you'll come over to them, they had an event that moved them and they were excited and inspired, and say, are you prepared to commit yourself to doing this for the rest of your life? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But they did. They understood. This is a big deal. So the Vilna Gaon says that's the Aleihem ki rotzu laharagoisem. They wanted to kill them. All right. Now the next generation comes along, and the parents say, okay, kids, we're going to have a meal now. Say, I can't come, I'm busy, my friend's coming over, I can't make it. And I want you to sit in shul, listen to the Megillah. I'm going to hand out noisemakers to all little kids, tell them to make noise when they make Haman's name, and you should hear every single word of the Megillah in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And the kids are like, seriously? Dad, I don't have time for this. Like, come on, this is crazy. He said, but you don't understand. My life was saved. I'm really glad your life was saved. I moved on already. I'm not interested. But no, they accepted Al-Zaram. Why? Because, says the Vilna Gaon, Heim hayu b'chlal la'abdam. They were also going to be destroyed. They were going to be destroyed. They didn't even exist yet. Well, of course, says the Vilna Gaon. Tell me, Im lo hayu avim, if there wouldn't be parents, would there be children? No. So if there wouldn't be parents, there wouldn't be children. So therefore, you wouldn't be if not for Purim. And since you wouldn't be if not for Purim, you have to celebrate. Okay. Now what about the convert? So the convert, if the convert's Purim wouldn't happen, the convert's parents wouldn't be killed because the convert wasn't Jewish. So if the convert's parents weren't Jewish, he would be here anyway. Aha, yes, says the Vilna Gaon. Of course he would be here. However, what religion would he join? Because the convert joins the Jewish people. There would be no Jewish people. Because the convert understands that his life and destiny is bound up with the Jewish people's destiny, and that he can only experience fruition when he is a part of the Jewish people, but not for Purim, there wouldn't be a Jewish people. So this is the idea that when somebody attaches themselves to the Jewish people, they attach themselves to the Jewish people, not only to the present Jewish people, but they're attaching themselves to all of Jewish history. For if not for Jewish history, to what faith system would the convert be welcomed? We are here because of our ancestors, and because we are here, the convert can be here to join us. So this is the reason that it has to say that the Jewish people were so moved and so inspired and so uplifted that they made the commitment aleihem, ve'al zaram, ve'al kol hanilvim aleihem. In other words, they made the commitment forever. An eternal commitment was made to observe Purim till the end of time. Which Yitzi's question is now automatically going to be answered. Right? His question was, could they say that they weren't part of that miracle, so therefore they should be exempt from celebrating that miracle? So there's your answer. Fine. This is what we'll call the opening volley of the pasuk. The pasuk is about the Jewish people accepting this holiday for posterity. If you like to hear it in Hebrew and from the pen of somebody who lived 150 years ago or so the Malbim simply repeats this without really adding much chiddush. He says, Lachein, therefore, Kimu v'kiblu, sheyihi kabbalas hapurim koilel, that the acceptance of Purim should be inclusive of l'deiros haboyim achareihem, for future generations. And that's the meaning, their children and those who would eventually join them. In other words, the convert's responsibility and obligation and mandate in celebrating Purim is not simply because he is a Jew, but because he has joined Jewish history. So he's not just called a convert. A convert is somebody who accepts upon himself that he'll do all the mitzvahs. Okay, so now he's tachat kanfei hashchina. No. Because he's tachat kanfei hashchina, he is now also connected to the sweep of Jewish history. And in the sweep of history, Purim is a big deal. Now, why indeed is Purim such a big deal in what we're going to call the grander sweep of history? After all, there were many examples where we were threatened and we survived. Is that all Purim is? Well, let me tell you, definitely not. And this is the verse that tips us off. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is the verse that's going to give us that kind of clarity. But now that we understand the opening part of the verse, let me just talk to you for a moment about the other segments of this verse, and then we will return to the beginning. Now, the next idea here is really the word velo ya'avor. Velo ya'avor on a literal level means that it will not pass on. This is not something which is a fad. This is not something which is going to simply fade away. But the truth is, it doesn't only mean that. It doesn't only mean that. It means velo ya'avor means it doesn't get celebrated past this day. And that's why I draw the comma after the words hanilvim aleihem. Eternity is embodied in that first part of the verse. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim aleihem v'alzaram v'lanilvim achareim. The next point that's being made is velo ya'avor. Velo ya'avor. Why velo ya'avor? What velo ya'avor? Velo ya'avor liyes oisim es shnei hayomim ha'ela. They will not be moved away. This will not pass on for making these 2 days. And what does it mean to make days? Who makes days? God makes time. This is that second part of the verse. The third part of the verse is how we're going to be making this. So the first part of the verse is like who or for how long? And the answer is all of us, forever. The second part of the verse is when precisely? And the answer is v'lo yaver, and these 2 days. How? The answer to that is kichsovam uchizmanam, in the way they're written, in its proper time, and this is b'chol shana v'shana. Now, truth be told, there is an element of commonality that weaves its way through the whole verse, because the verse opens with the words of eternity, right? The affirmation, the ratification of the Jewish people, their children, those who would join them, and it finishes off with the words b'chol shana v'shana, which means every single year, or forever. And forever is a long time. So this is forever. So it's not really 3 verses. It's not disjointed. But for brevity's sake, I'm going to kind of segment the verse into bite-sized pieces so we can do them one episode at a time. We have the time to fully appreciate and understand the message that the verse is giving us. So, now that we got all this kind of we've laid our foundation now, we're now going to return to the opening of the verse, the words Kimu v'kiblu. What does that mean? What does that mean, Kimu v'kiblu? What does it mean that they affirmed or confirmed or ratified? What does that mean? Established. And then they accepted. So the first kind of interesting comment on the verbiage that I want to introduce you to is the idea that this word, the word of Kimu, is translated by Rav Sadia Gaon, who translated the entirety of the Hebrew Bible into Hebreo-Arabic, the spoken Arabic that Jews spoke at the day, so they should be able to understand it like a Targum. So in Rav Sadia Gaon's view, the word of Kimu is hischayvu. That's how it translates in Arabic. They obligated themselves. They obligated. So a person could say, for example, are we meeting tomorrow at 1? And you can answer tentatively. By when will you confirm? I'll confirm this evening. So now you know you're going to get a confirmation, and in the evening you get a confirmation. What does a confirmation mean? It means a commitment. It means I obligate myself. Until I confirm my attendance, I am tentatively attending means I would like to attend, I'll probably attend, it looks like I'll attend, or I'm tentatively committing to doing this, but I didn't yet obligate myself to do this. And then when I formalize it, when I enter into an agreement, that's when it becomes something which is binding, something which is obligatory. So for example, let's say when a chatan and a kala commit to getting married, and they give each other their word, they're going to get married, and they begin the preparation. But they don't actually become legally bound to get married until there's a documentation that takes place. And our custom is, most often, that the documentation is done either on the day of the wedding or really at the wedding. It's called a tanoim. Tanoim is the conditions. And that's when a kinyan, that's when an act of acquisition is made, and that's when there's witnesses present, and that's when there's guarantors that are going to step in. And then we have people who are committing. They're committed to doing this, or they're obligating themselves. From this point onward, you have obligated yourself, yes, I am going to do this. So when you say confirmed, once you hit confirmed, now I'm going to do this. And that's how Rabbi Sadia explains the words. Kimu means the Jewish people confirmed. They radioed back to Mordechai and they said, confirmed, we're in. We're making this commitment. Now, of course, you could ask the question then, if it says Kimu, which means they confirmed, they obligated themselves, then why does it say Kimu v'kibel or v'kiblu? What is the Kimu? So what does it mean? They accepted upon themselves. What's the acceptance? What is the acceptance that the confirmation isn't? Ah, very good. Very good, Irit. Okay, you're right on the money. Nasa v'nishma. Put that in the back burner. We're going to come back to that. Now, there's a very interesting commentary from Nachmanides, Ramban. And I have to tell you that Ramban never wrote commentary on the Megillah, at least not that I know of. He wrote commentary on Mesechet Megillah, which is in the Gemara, but he did not write commentary in the actual Megillah. He wrote commentary in the Chumash and on certain parts of Tanakh. Very interestingly, in the Ramban and Nachmanides commentary on the second Torah portion, Parshat Noach, which is Genesis 6, the Ramban says something about Kiyum, about this kind of affirmation or confirmation or commitment. And he specifically references the Megillah. So we know how the Ramban would have learned the Megillah. And it's different than Reb Sadia. So the Ramban is explaining verse 18 of chapter 6. What's happening here? God is promising Noach that there's going to be a great big deluge. Tsunamis are going to be going off, and there's going to be huge geysers that are opening, and then the heavens are going to open in 40 days and 40 nights. You can't imagine, he tells him. It's going to be unbelievable. The whole world's going to be destroyed. And he makes a deal with Noach. He says, you're going to build that big floating barge and bring all the animals in. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of you. God says to Noach, V'hakimoti et briti. I'm going to establish my covenant. So he says, I'm going to establish my covenant. So the Ramban says, what does this mean? God's going to establish his covenant. First God promises, then he establishes. What does an established covenant look like? And he quotes the Even Ezer. The Even Ezer says that you have my guarantee. V'hakimoisi she'akayim shvuasi. I guess what I described before as confirmation. God's giving his confirmation. It was tentative, confirmed. Attendance confirmed. I'm committed. It's a commitment. And that's kind of the way Reb Sadia explains the words Kimu v'kibla Yehudim. But the Ramban has a number of difficulties with this. And he says, therefore, I'm going to respectfully suggest that it's not really what it means. It means something different. God made a promise. Of course, he confirmed. God said he's going to do it. What is it? He's going to change his mind on Noah? Doesn't make any sense. Ramban says that now that the Mabul is finally coming, and remember, Noach first heard about this Mabul 120 years prior. Now that the Mabul is finally going to be arriving. So the covenant that Hashem made is now going to be established, not in that Hashem is committed to doing it, but he reminds him that it's in place. It's solid. It's rocks. Not that I am committing. It is so. He's informing him that it is so. It is in place. Everything is in place. The promise, the guarantee, it's all in place. He says, Vuhu, it means, Sheyiyeh kayam. What I said will be. It's established. This is the way it's established. I made you a promise. It's already established. It's like for God, a promise is not a promise of something that's going to be. It's what we call money in the bank. It's already established, as if it's done already. And then the Ramban is like a little bit troubled. But that's not what the literal word means. The literal word is likayem, means to confirm that it is so. And for example, we have in the Talmud many discussions about legal documents that are called into question. For whatever reason. The one who's in debt says, I don't really owe the money. The document wasn't a real document. The witnesses are false. I paid back already. And he calls it into question. So what is the person who's owed the debt, what does he do now? He has documentation, and person saying that the documentation is fraudulent. It's counterfeit. So there's this concept called Kiyum Shtaris. Kiyum Shtaris is the equivalent in English of notarization. It's not a document, it's a notarized document. In other words, it has what we would call the backing of a trustworthy agent. In the case of the documentation, because it's legal, it would be a legal notarization, notarized by the courts. The courts analyzed this, they looked into this, they saw if the signatures are accurate, is investigated. You called it into question, investigation complete, stamped. It's guaranteed. So this is really how we understand the word of kiyum. Kiyum is not a commitment. Kiyum is something which is ratified, which is established, it's in place, it's notarized. And that's kind of how the Ramban says that. That's the meaning of Shihei Kayam. But he says, but where do we find in the scripture this idea? He says, V'hu kilashain. This is similar to the Hebrew verbiage in Megillat Esther, where it says, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, that the Jewish people affirmed and accepted. And he says that it means shekiblu aleihem davar lihiyoto kayam. They accepted it as a fact, not that they made a commitment. They accepted Purim. Purim is a commitment. They accepted Purim on themselves. Purim now became accepted. It was an accepted reality. It's like sometimes people try to effectuate change, and you don't know, like, has this become a norm yet? Has this become part of life yet? And at a certain point, it's irrevocable because it's already part of life. It's already an established fact. So the Ramban is explaining to us that the word Kimu v'kiblu is not to be understood as in Kimu v'kiblu, that they were committing to doing this, that from this point onward, the Jewish people accepted Purim as an established fact. It is now a part of Judaism. And anything which is a part of Torah Judaism can never, ever fade away, and never will fade away. There are lots of cultural things which are here today and they'll be gone tomorrow. I'm sure of that, because that's what Jewish history is full of. Many movements that rose and filled the sounds and sights of Jewish life with all kinds of interesting nuance, and then they just disappeared. And they're not here anymore. But this is forever. This is forever. Like I would just give you an example, like the commentary of Ramban is part of Torah forever. If somebody writes a commentary today or prints a book today, which is very interesting, is it still going to be relevant in 50 or 60 years? I don't know. I can't tell you that that's an actual part of the eternity of Torah. The books that I have in front of me, this is part of the eternity of Torah. They have been accepted by the Jewish people. And there's a concept that when a sefer is accepted or embraced by the Jewish people and accepted as a part of Torah, that this is a sign that indeed it is a part of Torah. That's the litmus test. Does it get embraced? Does it get accepted? And is it something which remains important, studied, looked at, regarded forever? So that's the idea of establishment here. That's what we're talking about here. So this is interesting. This is important for us to understand. And as such, we would say that Kimu v'kibla Yehudim could best be translated as the Jewish people accepted as an established. It was established. It was a given. It was taken as it was an established fact now. The kiblu, and they accepted. Now, of course, you can ask the question, if it's an established fact, what do you mean they accepted? You should accept it, and by virtue of their acceptance, it becomes an established fact. It's a little backwards. It should have said kiblu v'kimu. We're going to come back to that. Now, the Maharal of Prague, in his commentary, Or Chodesh, he says like this. Didn't we read about this just a few verses back? Didn't we read in verse 23, V'ki beil ha-Yehudim, the Jewish people accepted, es asher achelu lasos, that which they had begun to do? We did. And if you remember, we talked quite a bit about that. So the Maharal says that the reason that it says Kimu, and only afterwards does it say Kiblu, because first they should have accepted it, and then it becomes established. So what is it? First it's established as a fact, and then they accept it upon themselves? Obviously, it's an established fact. So Maharal says, L'fi hasvara, by logic, it should have said, Koidim Kiblu, v'achar kach Kimu. And the Maharal explains, Rak mepnei, ki barishayna, hechelu lases, kasher hargu b'seineim v'asu mishta v'simcha b'yodal v'tezvav. Nobody had to tell the Jewish people who saw the miracle that they should celebrate. They knew they had to celebrate. They knew it. They just experienced it. It's a year later. A year goes by, people start to forget. Now he says it's the second year. Now that it's being established as a Yom Tov, that which they originally accepted now became established. In other words, when does something become an established part of life? And the answer is the year after, the years to come. Not at when it's dynamic, not at the moment when it's happening. At the moment when it's happening, it doesn't become established. We don't know if that's going to last. You'll see if it's going to last, how it's regarded a year later. How did they embrace it with the same gusto, with the same enthusiasm, with the same fervor, with the same level of passion and commitment? And the answer, incidentally, is yes. And that's what the meaning of Kimu v'kiblu, that now it had become established, that which they had accepted upon themselves to begin with. But Kimu, this gave the ratification, this really notarized it and formalized it, that which they had done earlier. And that's why it says Kimu, established. V'acharkach kosav v'kiblu. And only afterwards it say they accepted. Why? Because they established what had been done. They accepted it as established. And then they accepted that this would be the case for the future. They ratified the past and made a commitment for the future. So there's verse 23, Kimu. V'kibel HaYehudim, they accepted, the Jewish people accepted. Now, verse 27, Kimu, it's established and notarized. It's not just a thing that happened. And V'kibel, and they accepted upon themselves for their children and for those who will join them for all time. So this verse of Kimu is kind of between two kiblus. There's the kibel in verse 23. There's the Kimu, the establishment that heralds verse 27. And then the v'kibel, which is going forward into the future. So the Kimu then is dynamic, is present. And the kiblu is futuristic. That's how the Maral explains it. Now you might notice in your text that the word inside, it's read v'kiblu because there's a shuruk or a malupim under the lamed. But if you look at the way it's spelled v'kibel. There is no vav after the lamed. Usually there would be a vav after the lamed. So Michael W. is saying, sounds like when the people at Mount Sinai before the Torah was given. Michael, that's an amazing comment, and it's connected to what Irit said in Asav and Nishma. You guys are ahead of yourselves. Pat yourself on the back, you're doing great. Let's put that on the back burner. There is a sweep of history. We'll be coming back to that. But yes, there is a similarity, and we're going to get to that soon. Yitzi wants to know if this is like the Chanukah, Lashana, Acheres Kavaum, probably. The image of Hanukkah comes from this, but you'll see this is like, there's a lot going on here. So let's just take this piece by piece. So why does it say the kibel? It doesn't say there's the lamed. Kimu is not written kuf yud mem, and with a shuruk under the mem, which would read kimu. It says kuf yud mem vav. Kimu, that's how it's spelled out. But the next word vikibel, which is read vikiblu, and we see there's a shuruk, a malupim, right? The diagonal line under the lamed with vowelizer is a lu, vikiblu. Why doesn't the vav show up there? What's the difference between having a vav and not having a vav? What's the difference between vikibel and vikiblu? Pluralizer single, very good. So vikibel is single and vikiblu is plural. Says the Maharal, who notarizes things for the Jewish people? Like who actually formalizes things, and does everybody get to decide this on their own? The answer is no. There's a formal body. Who's the body? The Sanhedrin, the ecclesiastical high court of the Jewish people, the court, the Bezdin. However, the Bezdin does not act independent of the nation. In fact, there's this idea that if a Bezdin makes an ordination, ordains something, and it doesn't catch on, doesn't gain traction with the population, that the ordination is deemed to be moot. Doesn't apply. Because really, the court only has as much power as the people give it. So the court can ordain things, but if the people don't rally around the court and don't follow the court, then the court's injunction will not have a lasting impact. There's a famous example where Ezra HaSofer made an injunction about men visiting the mikvah on a regular basis. And in fact, it is not obligatory in today's day and age. And it hasn't been obligatory for a very, very long time because the courts investigated, courts after Ezra's passing investigated, and they saw that it never really gained traction. It never was accepted. So therefore, because it was never nitpashet, it never spread, it never caught on, so it's deemed to be moot. It wasn't an ordination. That doesn't mean that it isn't meaningful or special, or we shouldn't try to do it. It just means that it didn't catch on. So the Maharal says, HaKabbalah hazot, this Kabbalah, this acceptance, this is Bezdin shal Yisrael lo yomakabelim aleim. This is an agency. It's made up of different people, but it's a court. Singular. It's a court. The court accepts it upon themselves. And that's the Lashon Kibel, Lashon Yachid, because it's talking to the court, the agency, or the aegis. Aval Hakri, that's the way it's written, but the way it's read is Kiblu. Why? Because it was not the courts acting independent of the will of the people. The courts embodied and ultimately represented the will of the people. They gave it the stamp of approval, the good house seal, so to speak, the good housekeeping seal, that it was in fact ratified as a Torah thing. But it was something that the entirety of the nation bought into. Like there's a story, Rabbi Edelman, Alav Shalom, related a story that in the early years, the early 1946 or 47, he was in the hallway outside the Beis Medrash, in the small Beis Medrash upstairs in 770. At that time, that was the yeshiva. And the Rebbe was the previous Rebbe's son-in-law at the time. He headed the print house, the publishing house of Lubavitch, and the outreach hand of Lubavitch, and the educational arm of Lubavitch, but he wasn't a Rebbe. And the Rebbe saw Rabbi Edelman, and they were standing together looking through the door in the Beis Medrash, and everybody was sitting and studying. And there was two students, and they were studying the Pnei Yeshua. Pnei Yeshua is a very important commentary in the Talmud that was authored in the late 16th or 17th century. So the Rebbe looks at Rabbi Edelman, he sees the boys learning the Pnei Yeshua, and he says, the Rebbe said the words like this: the Pnei Yeshua, a sefer was is niskabel geworden betfutzes Yisrael. The Pnei Yeshua, a work, a published work, which was accepted by the entirety of the Jewish people. There is no self-respecting scholar of the Talmud who didn't or doesn't study Pnei Yeshua. It's not possible. Like you study Talmud, you learn Rashi, Tosfos, everybody learns Pnei Yeshua. It's not like, this group does Pnei Yeshua, that group, everybody learns Pnei Yeshua. And the Rebbe said to him that this is a sign that it's Amitasa Shal Torah, that it's Torah truth. Because Torah truth is embraced by the nation. So this idea, the Maharal says, is that the courts accept it, but it becomes like every individual accepts it. And that's why the Kimu was Lashon Rabin. Because in truth, the courts don't keep mitzvahs. Who keeps mitzvahs? We keep mitzvahs. Kol echad hu mekayim ha-mitzvah. Every one of us accepts and fulfills the mitzvah. So it's as if the whole Jewish people, when the courts accepted it, it was like the courts notarized it on behalf of the whole Jewish people, but the Jewish people themselves, they were the ones who committed to doing this. And of course you can ask the question, how could they make a commitment for future generations? I mean, they made a commitment for themselves, but who says? Who says? How'd they know? That's a good question. So we'll come back to that soon. In the Manas HaLevi, the Al-Kabatz says similar verbiage. He says, he doesn't so much ask the question, but he gives the answer without asking the question. He says, V'higdim Kimu First, the verse says to establish, v'achar kach kiblu, and then accept, ki pshutai ki kein haya hadavar. Because that's how it was. They hein kimu, they established, and then kibluhu b'gzeiras Mordechai ubezdin, and the people accepted it upon themselves. The people said, this is the injunction of Mordechai and the Bezdin, and therefore, v'kibulei Yehudim, the Jewish people accepted it. So very similar. The Maharal and the Alkabats never saw each other. I don't believe they saw each other's works. The Alkabats lived in Tzfat, Maharal's in Bavaria or Moravia or wherever Prague was at the time. Similar approach, similar time, similar approach. You see the same Torah truism that's playing itself out here. Okay. And in an earlier work, the work of Rabbeinu Levi ben Gershon, Ralbag, who is referred to often as Gersonides, he says like this: what does it mean? What does it mean when we say that the Jewish people accepted it and on their children, Kimu v'kiblu? He says it was a Kabbalah and a Kiyum shalayaver v'leyaser. It was an acceptance, not just a personal acceptance. It was an establishment and an acceptance that this is going to be here forever. This is an eternal thing. And obviously, no regular person can make that kind of commitment. That has to come from the Bezdin. But the Bezdin can't do it without the generation either. So it was a generation of Jewish people, and it was their ecclesiastical figureheads and the agency, and this together forms what we call the body of this commitment. Am I missing a sefer? Sorry? See? Okay. It's not true that we don't agree. On the truth, we agree. The Eshkol HaKofer, the commentary of the Eshkol HaKofer says like this. What's the difference, he says, between verse 23 and verse 27? HaKabbalah HaRishayna. In verse 23, the first acceptance was Al Oisei Hadar Levad, for that generation. They said, we will do this. We will do this for our lifetime. Avali says, Kishiro Yisrael Mailas Hanes, when the people started to realize what really went on here. Shekora b'chol divrei heigeres mitchila v'ad seif, they read the Megillah, and I would say they studied the Megillah. When they studied the Megillah, and they saw that all of the Nisim Nistarim, they began to recognize all of the hidden miracles, and that's the primary thrust of the Megillah. And when this is when they realized, so the Megillah conveyed the message of Purim to them. When they understood the profundity of Purim by virtue of studying the Megillah, the Kibbutz Yehudim Aleim Valzarim. They said, this is not just a miracle of deliverance. This is a major milestone in the development and eternity of the Jewish people. Now, of course, you could ask the question, why? What did they notice that was so extraordinary here? What was it that jumped out of them with such force that they said, this is something that we are going to be accepting upon ourselves forever? And that leads us into the next point here. I'm going to introduce the next point to you by virtue of something that the Targum Sheni says. The Targum Sheni, when it says Kimu v'kiblu, and remember the Targum Sheni, the second Targum is more of a midrashic rather than simply a translation. The Targum Sheni says, Kaimu Iloi Madekabilu Yehudoi. The heavenly reality accepted upon themselves what the Jewish people accepted upon themselves. In other words, from heaven it was established what the Jews accepted. What does this mean? What is the Targum alluding to? So the Maharal of Prague says that if you want to understand what the Targum Sheni is saying, you have to take a look at the Gemara in Masechet Megillah, the end of side 1 of Daf Zayin, page 7, the end of side A. I'm mentioning this because we actually really should learn this Gemara. I think our immediate past episode of the Gemara was actually on this. So anybody who's interested can go back and look at that Gemara. The Gemara says, how do we know that the book of Esther is written by divine inspiration? And the Gemara gives a number of different teachings. One teaching was, Vayomer Haman belibo. Haman said in his heart. How did they know what Haman said in his heart? He said in his heart. Who could make a statement like that? Unless you know from a higher place. And then the Gemara brings a whole bunch of other examples like this. And the Gemara says the truth is that these proofs aren't absolute, because there could have been supposition, and you can look at things he said after, so you could kind of guess what he might have said in his heart. That the chances of all of these things just happening to be become a statistical nil. But still, no one proof is absolute. And the Gemara comes along and says that the junior of the group had given the best answer of all. And the youngest or junior member, his was milsa de adifa mikulu. What's the milsa de adifa mikulu? Kimu v'kibla Yehudim. The Gemara says, Kimu l'mayla, they established in heaven, masha kiblu l'mata. The people said, we're going to do this. In heaven, they said, it will be done. This is like Ramban says, like it's in place, it's established. In other words, it was established by virtue of the fact that the Jewish people made this commitment. That was indicative of a heavenly change. So the Maharal says, the meaning then of Kimu v'kiblu is not simply that this was a discussion that people had amongst themselves, even the most rarefied of individuals, and even those who were tasked with the Torah leadership, and even those who are given aegis and power by the Torah itself, like the Sanhedrin. Kimu v'kiblu teaches us, Melamed explains the Maharal, ki mitzvah zois, that this commandment, this mitzvah of Kriyas HaMegillah, nechoshev ki ilu Hashem yizbarech tziva aleha, is considered as if God himself commanded us to do this. It's considered as if God himself had commanded us to read the Megillah. Because in heaven it was established what they accepted on earth. Kivon shehiskem al mitzvah zeis, because on high means Hashem. Nechoshev ki Hashem yizbarach tziva, it's as if God had actually given this commandment, even though God didn't give the commandment. The Sanhedrin gave the commandment. Now you have to know that when the Sanhedrin, or the high court of the Jewish people, make an injunction or a mitzvah, it does become a mitzvah. By virtue of the fact, as the Rambam explains in multiple places, because the Torah says that you must do kechol asher yerucha. Everything the sages, the Sanhedrin will tell you, becomes an obligation for you to do. And lo tasur min hadavar. Not only is it a positive mitzvah to listen to the Sanhedrin, it becomes a negative mitzvah, a violation of the Torah, when we turn our backs on and ignore what the Sanhedrin told us. Which makes every rabbinic mitzvah, by default, both a positive mitzvah, something to do, and something to avoid, a passive mitzvah, a negative mitzvah. So something we shouldn't do. So that's how we can say Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu. We can fire up our candle. See, Michael David's just posted the link of the Talmud class. You can light a candle and light a match, and you say, "I'm now making a bracha Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu lahadlik ner Chanukah." But where did God command us to light a Chanukah menorah? And you can raise a special hand-washing cup, and you can wash your hands in the specifically prescribed manner, and you say, Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu al netilat yadayim. But where did God tell us to wash our hands? He didn't. The laving of hands is not in the Torah. Well, he told us we have to listen to the Sanhedrin. However, Maharal says, this mitzvah is more so than sha'ar mitzvahs shehem midrabanan. The mitzvahs of Purim are more important or more divine than the other rabbinic mitzvahs. Because the other rabbinic mitzvahs is bezdin hatachton gozru bavad. It is only the injunction of the earthly court. Avo mitzvah zois, but this mitzvah, it is nechoshev shehu mitzvahs min Hashem yisbarach. That's if God Himself gave the mitzvah. But he says, but it's not like a mitzvah that comes from on high. It's kind of a mitzvah that comes from below, because after all, it was Mordechai, it was the Sanhedrin, it was Esther. It's not written in the Torah. And the Maharal says an incredible thing. He says, this mitzvah then becomes a unique mitzvah in the entirety of Judaism, where it is part heaven and part earth. It's like from the Sanhedrin, but it's also ratified and established by God Himself. So it's like a divinely ordained mitzvah, a humanly ordained mitzvah by virtue of the Torah's instructions, which is like a divinely ordained mitzvah. And we're going to come back to this, because when you look at it the way as Chassidus explains it, this Maharal really goes nuclear. It explains why Purim is the highest of the high, the most amazing of all the mitzvahs. So now we have a different understanding of the Kimu v'Kiblu. So we talked about before, it was established. It was established, yes, but then the question was asked, okay, very nice. I'm sure they established it. I'm sure like they accepted upon themselves that it was established, and they accepted upon themselves, but you're making a kind of a statement that it's aleim, alzaram, it's for everybody. Okay, we explain this in a literal way, but how do you know that Jewish people will still be doing this? I know there will be Jewish people who will not be celebrating Purim. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. Hopefully. I know there was Jewish people who didn't celebrate Purim last year, let's say. Meretz Hashem this year, everybody's celebrating Purim. But I know there was Jewish people who didn't celebrate Purim last year. There's also Jewish people who didn't celebrate Rosh Hashanah. There's also Jewish people, unfortunately, who didn't celebrate Pesach. There's also Jewish people who don't put on tefillin. There's also Jewish people who don't do a lot of things. That doesn't mean that it's not part of Jewish eternity. Because in every generation, there have been Jewish people who celebrated Purim and observed Rosh Hashanah and put on tefillin and put mezuzos. And the fact that in every generation there have been devout and pious Jewish people who have performed and observed and followed the Torah and its mitzvos tells us that it's eternal. The fact that there are detractors to the eternity of Torah does not detract from the eternity of Torah. It's, as we say, tragically their loss, not the Torah's loss. Sure, it's offensive to Hashem, it's painful for Hashem when His children don't behave, but it doesn't change the dynamic of Torah eternity. And the very fact that Jewish people forever embrace Purim, even if not all the Jewish people embraced it last year, hopefully everybody will do tshuva by this year, it tells you that this is part of Jewish eternity. So that's the Kimu v'Kiblu. Now you have a different understanding of this verse. Once we understand the Kimu as being from heaven, we got the wink. From heaven it was ratified. From heaven it was established. Now, of course, this interpretation could not follow Reb Saadia Gaon's literal interpretation as they committed themselves. Because the Kiblu is they committed themselves. But the Kimu is the establishment. This really follows the approach of Ramban, where the establishment was a thing that was done for posterity. By heaven established it so. Kimu v'kibel Yehudim. It was established, and indeed the Jewish people did accept it upon themselves. And it becomes part of forever. Of Aleim Alzaram Vakol Nilv Machareim. This brings us to the next subject. This brings us to part 3. So we went through the pshat of it, the pshat of Kimu v'Kiblu. We understood how it could be Kimu before Kiblu. Then we got introduced to the next level of this idea that this is ratified from heaven. And then this goes, so to speak, nuclear within the frame of what we're going to call Torah Judaism. Now it really goes, now it takes its place in history, in what I like to call the sweep of history. So there's a drasha, there is an exposition on this very verse in the Gemara, in Masechet Shabbat. And it's a teaching of Rabbi Avdimi Bar Chama, Rabbi Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa, asks a question, or kind of directs our attention to the fact that when the Torah describes the Jewish people, and this is Exodus 19, verse 17, the Jewish people gathering to receive the Torah, that it says, Vayityatzvu, that the people stood, Betachtit Hahar. Betachtit Hahar means really at the just under the mountain, at the edge of the mountain or under the mountain. Now, to be sure, on a literal level, on a pshat level, Rashi explains in Chumash, what does tachtit ahar means? It stood under the mountain, they went into a cavern. He says it means l'raglei ahar. Rashi, quoting our sages, says it just means they were at the foot of the mountain. Okay. However, Rav Avdimi has a drash. It doesn't say tachtit, it doesn't say tachat ahar. That's true. However, it also doesn't really say at the edge. It sounds like tachtit, sounds like somehow beneath. Sounds like beneath. So there's, on a pshat level, we could say beneath doesn't mean beneath at the bottom of the mountain, but it sounds still like beneath. So the Gemara says that Avdimi Bar Chasa said, Melamed, this teaches us, and this is in a level of what we call homily, a drush, Shakofa HaKadosh Baruch Hu Aleim Es Ahar Kigigis, that God held the mountain over them like a barrel. Rashi says, a gigis, first of all, tachtis ahar, says Rashi, that the intimation of the drasha is tachat hahar, actually under the mountain. How does that work? So he says that Hashem held the mountain, ki gigis. Rashi gives us a French word, a couve, and he says it's some kind of small barrel, shematilim b'shecher, some kind of a beer barrel, some kind of beer barrel, like a keg. It's probably the way we translate it in English today. So gigis is a keg. Under a keg, he held the mountain over them like a keg. V'amar lahem, and he said to them, Im atem mekablu mat Torah, if you accept the Torah today, mutav, no problem. Ve'im lav, however, if you do not accept upon yourself the Torah, so then this will be the burial site of a nation. The mountain will become your tombstone, and it will say, here lies the nation called Israel. Sham tehei kfur aschem, here's where you get buried. Now, is this literal? God literally uproot the mountain and hold it over their head? The answer is, it's not a pasuk. It's not a pasuk. It's a euphemism. It could be a mashal, it could be a metaphor, or it could be literal. But what is clear, whether it is literal or metaphorical, what is clear is that there was coercion. That's clear. Now, of course, Tosfos asked the question, what do you mean? Like the Jewish people already said Nasa v'nishma. So they said, yeah, they said Nasa v'nishma before, but now that they're right in the middle of the thick of things and the fire is going and it was terrifying, and the body and soul was separating, they said, one second. Okay. I know we said yes, I know we said we confirmed, but can we look at that again? Can we revisit this? This is what you call, euphemistically, people say the bride gets cold feet. It's an expression. And there are some crazy stories, it's not only in the movies, where the day of her wedding, the bride said, I can't do this. But you committed. I did. You're wearing a white gown. I am. Chuppah. Not happening. There are some crazy stories like that of people who had buyer's remorse in the 11 hours and 59 seconds. Okay, so that's on a simple level. That's what Tosfos explains at a very simple level. The Maharsha says that tachtis indicates a surrounding, that it surrounded them. It's not just beneath, not just at the beneath the mountain. Tachtis is like they were like surrounded. They were entirely beneath, entirely subsumed. So it sounds like this is the situation, and the Gemara makes a very unusual kind of observation. Amar Rabbi Bar Yankiv. Rabbi Bar Yankiv said, you know what? Mikan meidor rabba lo eraisa. This becomes the great big disclaimer for the Torah. What does it mean, a great big disclaimer? Meidor rabba. So Rashi says, Meidor rabba means, or disclaimer means, im yazmel adin, if you're taken to a court for a legal kind of enforcement, lama loy kiyamtem ma shekibaltem alechem, You accepted upon yourself or the obligation, the responsibility, you committed. What would the answer be? Yeah, I committed. Yesh lem tshuva. Kibluha be'oines. We were forced into it. And because we were forced into it, as such, that's not really binding. So, for example, the Rambam in Hilchos Mechira in the 10th chapter, he tells us, what do you do if a person is being forced to sell something they don't want to sell? For example, a guy named Gambinovich comes to visit you, and he says, I'd like to buy a house, or I'd like to buy a business. And you're like, yeah, I don't want to sell it. And the next day you have a dead horse on your front doorstep. And the day after it's a dead donkey. And then after they deliver a pig's head. I don't know, the scare tactics. And Gambinovich comes back and he says, listen, I have a family. My family is some interesting people. We wanted to know what your shoe size is. And the guy says, my shoe size? He says, yeah, we have sneakers. We wanted to fit for you. Sneakers? Yeah, cement sneakers. You go for a walk in the river after. They scare the living daylights out of you. And they say, did we make ourselves clear? We're going to pay. This is our price, and you're selling. So what's the guy going to do? What's he going to do? And let's say there wasn't a court of law, and let's say he didn't have any recourse. So is that it? Is it done? So the halacha says this. He could call in two people, and he could say, Harei ani moiser maido lefnechem. I am making a disclaimer for you. We are going to be making a document. And you are going to be my witnesses, or there's going to be witnesses, and there's going to be a document drawn up. And then the document is going to say that I sold this property fair and clear with absolutely no reservation. And I wanted to sell the property, and I begged them to buy the property, and they finally agreed to buy the property. And I have no claims whatsoever. That's what I'm going to be signing. But I'm telling you that none of that is true. And the reason I'm doing it is because I'm not interested in going for a walk on Lake Ontario wearing cement sneakers. So what happens now? What happens now? They took the property. And guess what happens? All of a sudden, there's a new sheriff in town. And now enforcement has arrived. And now the seller comes along and he says, I'd like my property back. And he said, what are you talking? Why should we sell it back to you? We don't want to sell it back to you. You sold it fair and clear and square. And they say, yeah, I sold it fair and square. I sold it because you forced me. We forced you? Here's the document. Here's your document. Here's my witnesses. And the guy comes to court and he brings his witnesses. What happens then? What do you think the halacha is? The halacha is the sale is null and void. If he gave money, he has to give back the money. Why? Because he had a disclaimer. You claimed I wanted to, but I didn't want to. So if we get held accountable, we say, why didn't you do the Torah? Well, we didn't really commit to doing this. What do you mean? You said the Nasav and Ishma. Yeah, and then we were kind of not so sure about this. And then we were coerced. There was a proverbial keg over our heads. So the Gemara says this is a big problem. It's a disclaimer. So we're not really obligated. Now don't get too excited. So we're not really obligated. So we have a disclaimer and a way out. Oh, no, says the Gemara. Afal pike, nonetheless, Hadar kibluha b'yemei Achashverosh. In the days of Achashverosh, we did accept this willingly. In other words, Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim kimuha masha kiblu kvar, says the Gemara. We accepted upon ourselves in the days of Achashverosh. Rashi says, me'ahavas hanes. We were so overwhelmed and so moved by what happened. We said, yes, we are an eternal Jewish people. Yes, we can bounce back from the abyss. Yes, we were slated for genocide. And we had totally assimilated. And yes, we were able to, in a moment, shake off the dust and reaffirm our status as Jewish people. Yes, we're in. We're in forever. In other words, according to the Gemara, Purim's place in history, as conveyed to us in this verse, is the completion of nothing less than Matan Torah itself. Imagine that. That's big stuff. That's about as big as it gets. Now, the Alter Rebbe in Torah tells us that this doesn't have to be understood in literal fashion necessarily. The Alter Rebbe tells us that it could easily be referring to what we call being overwhelmed by Hashem's love. And the love was so intoxicating, and the love was so powerful that we simply said yes. But Hashem swept us off our feet. And the Alter Rebbe says in Daf Tzaddik Ches, Amud Aleph, he says in the Maimer Chayev Inish L'Psuim V'Purya, he says Mikan Medor Rabbi Le'Raisa. He quotes this whole Gemara and he says what the Gemara says. And he said, what does this mean? Does it mean that the Jewish people had done so under duress? And he explains that Matan Torah was a time of extraordinary revelation. And because there was this extraordinary level of revelation, so we were simply swept off our feet. And we weren't really functioning. We were overwhelmed by the situation. And in a certain sense, we were coerced. However, in the time of Purim, there was the polar opposite of what we call revelation. In fact, it was absolute darkness. And nonetheless, we remained committed. And then a great miracle happened. But it wasn't a miracle like the ancient miracles, the miracles that were overt and obvious. We had to notice these things, and we did notice these things. As we read before, the Eshkol HaKefer says, we read the Megillah, we understood the Megillah, we got it, we understood what Purim really represented, what it really meant to us. And that is something that meant that we were committed for posterity. The Alter Rebbe explains, what does it mean? Kofa aleim har kegigis. He says, this is like the idea of Yemini techabkeni, that Hashem embraces us with His right hand. This is galos ava al-yena, when you feel this rush of incredible, powerful attraction to God. Hashem says, I love you. When we felt this love. And this love was like a gigis. It surrounded us. It saturated, overwhelmed us. And as such, so we said yes, but we didn't know what we were saying even. We were intoxicated by the revelation and the love. However, here, the Ahavas HaNes, the nest that happened here was not that kind of nest, that kind of miracle. It's a miracle that we had to notice the miracle. We had to identify the miracle. We had to put the pieces together by ourselves. That's not overwhelming. It's almost underwhelming. And we are the ones then who made that commitment. So now we understand that this pasuk is extremely important verse. The eternity of Purim is based on nothing less than a ratification of Matan Torah itself, the completion of Matan Torah itself. The Maharal of Prague explains it in these words. He says that the meaning then is that by virtue of the Megillah, by accepting upon themselves the Megillah, they now were accepting upon themselves something that was almost accepted at the time of Har Sinai. It's like the Megillah is almost Har Sinai worthy. It's almost like Har Sinai, I think. And Bimei Mordechai ve'Esther kiblua, they accepted upon themselves this mitzvah as if it was written in the Torah itself. Maharal of Prague sees a certain equivalence almost drawn between the story of Purim and the story of Matan Torah and the mitzvah of Megillah and the Torah itself. And he says you can see this in expressed in the Gemara Maseches Megillah, and we learned that Gemara also. It's recorded, it's available. The Gemara on Daf Yudalad on page 14 says that there were 48 male prophets and 7 prophetesses. And it says, Kulum le'paschu le'yasifu, nobody added or subtracted chas v'shalom. However, there's an exception, because every rule has an exception, and the exception is Mikra Megillah. And he said, the Maharal says, but it's not really an exception, because it's not different than the rest of the mitzvahs. Ubazeh kiblu aleim kol ha-mitzvahs. By accepting upon themselves the mitzvahs of Purim and the mitzvah of listening to the Kriya of the Megillah, they accepted upon themselves by means of what we call a fortiori by Kal V'chomer, all of the mitzvahs. A mitzvah shalai shamaynu min Hashem. A mitzvah we didn't hear through God. And yet we were prepared to make that commitment and make that promise. So how much more so the mitzvahs we did hear from God? For sure then we're going to accept upon ourselves those. If we accepted Purim forever, for sure we accepted the rest of Yiddishkeit forever. And that's the meaning of Kimu v'Kiblu. So really the Maharal explains it in very literal and very practical terms. And the Eshkol HaKofer says, so if you read this verse, Lefi Darka, if you follow the approach of this verse, it's Ke'ein Matan Torah. It's literally like the Torah is being given to us on Purim. Purim has a connection to Shavuot. And we're going to talk about that in the next class. Matan Torah. So now he says, the Eshkol HaKofer says something incredible. So why do we say Aleihim, Val Zaram, Valakol Hanil v'Macharim? Listen to this. He says, just like by Matan Torah, we're taught that all of the generations participated. Amdu Sham, Kol HaDeiros HaSidin, all future generations. As we see in the words of Moshe Rabbeinu, Deuteronomy 29, verse 14, Ki es asher yeshna pai, ve'es asher inena pai. Those who are here, and those who are not here. This was a covenant with future generations also. So too, he says, Kach Omer Bekan Aleihim Val Zaram V'Kol Hanil v'Machareim, which means that just like we say that every neshama was at Har Sinai, and just like every neshama participated in the giving of the Torah and was there for Nasav and Ishma and therefore for the Torah being given, so too, every one of us was kind of there on Purim. We were a part of this on Purim. And when our ancestors accepted it, they embedded it into our DNA. I guess you would call this, in the language of science, epigenetics. It became burned into our genetics. Now it became part of our genes. And because it became part of our genes, and it becomes part of every single Yid for posterity. Once it's part of every Yid for posterity, it's part of, Yitzi's asking the soul of converts, where they are Bahar Sinai. First of all, yes, the soul of converts were Bahar Sinai. And yes, they're part of Purim. Everybody's part of Purim. So Purim is not a little, a cute little day for children. Purim is a day of massive importance. It is, quite literally, the holiest day, the most powerful day, the most wonderful day of the year. I was recently listening to a Fabrengen, and I went to look up the Sichas at the Purim Fabrengen at Tavshalam and Beis. I have to tell you, in certain circles, Purim is like a silly day. People act silly, and they get drunk and act silly, and even very prominent people. For Hasidim, Purim is a very serious thing, a very joyous thing, but we take that joy very seriously. And by the Rebbe's Fabrengen, there was the most remarkable Fabrengens, or the Purim Fabrengens, was nothing silly. The deepest secrets of Torah and the incredible ideas that Rebbe tackled, major issues, world issues, the Fabrengen of Purim was unique in its kind. And we have them almost all recorded, almost all 40 years of Fabrengens, amazing Fabrengens. Profundity and depth and the wide-ranging nature and the creative nature, very unusual for Fabrengens. Serious day. It wasn't fun and games. It was very joyous, but it wasn't fun and games. Purim's not a silly day, chas v'sholem. Purim's the holiest of days. The Rebbe said, based upon everything we learned today, and especially the way this is explained in Chassidus, because we're learning Megillah now. I'm not teaching a Maimer of Chassidus. I have to tell you, there are very many Maimarim of Chassidus based on this idea. There's a lot of ink spilled by the Rabbeim on this idea. So the Rebbe said, based on this idea, he spoke about Sharei Eira and Eira Torah from the Mittler Rebbe and from the Rebbe the Tzemach Tzedek, that Purim basically becomes the conclusion of Matan Torah itself. Purim represents the end of Matan Torah. What began at Sinai concluded at Shushan. And Matan Torah, it happened in a way of coercion, the overwhelming nature of Matan Torah, Kafaleim Har Kegigis, Mikan Medor Rabba L'Raisa, and like the Rashi we just learned. But once they accepted it upon themselves in Shushan, Kimu v'Kiblu, right, the Jewish people time of Purim. So now the great disclaimer is gone. There is no disclaimer anymore. Now we're in 100%. And we all, in other words, all demonstrated our appreciation for Torah itself. Not for the the external love that Hashem showed us. It was Torah itself that we became committed to. And how is this expressed? V'kibel ha-Yehudim. V'kibel. V'kibel means literally to receive. To accept, to receive. So the Rebbe said an amazing thing. When the Mishnah talks to us about receiving the Torah, the Mishnah says, Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moshe received the Torah. He absorbed the Torah. He accepted the Torah. It became part of him. Moshe and Torah are synonymous. But then when it comes to Yehoshua, it doesn't say Yehoshua kibel. It says u'mesara, and he gave the obligation and responsibility, passed it on to Yehoshua. But it doesn't say the word v'kibel. It only says Moshe received the Torah. And the Rebbe says, now at this point, v'kibel ha-Yehudim. V'kibel singular, because like Moshe kibel Torah, so we all have the virtue of receiving the Torah. And the Rebbe says this changes the Jewish people forever. We all now are studying Torah, so to speak, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Now we're absorbing the Torah. The Torah is being received by us in a whole different way because we made this commitment. I was thinking about it. I was listening to this tapes. I was thinking that when you have an artifact that's identified not by its weight or mass, but by its use, by its form, so then it's mekabel tumah. It could become, it's susceptible to ritual impurity. For example, if you have a clump of metal, scrap metal is not able to become tameh because it's not a keli. It only has mass, it doesn't have form. But if that metal is a fork or a knife or a spoon, you don't say, pass that metal to me, or pass that silver. What do you say? Pass the spoon. I don't identify it by its weight or its mass. I identify it by its shape, by its purpose. So it's like a piece of art. Like when something is used to make a piece of art, somebody takes a block of marble and turns it into some kind of a beautiful picture. Now it becomes that picture. The marble was a block of marble. Now it's a marble tree. So it's no longer identified by what it's made of. Now it's a stone tree. Now it's a tree. Now it's a whatever else it's made. It's made into an artifact. And as long as the form is implemented, or the form is applied to the mass, without mass we couldn't have a form. So when we talk about the form, we're talking about something which is an intangible. It's not measured by mass. It's the indentations that are made that makes it meaningful. So in the language of what we use in the Mishnah, it says like a keli haroi lekabala. A keli has to be able to receive. If it can't receive, it's not a keli. So if you have a cup, for example, but the cup has a hole in the bottom, is it a cup? No, it's no longer a cup. And because it has a big hole in the bottom, it's actually, if it was tameh, it's not tameh anymore. It's not able to hold on to the ritual impurity. Why? Because it lost its use. Or if it's broken, it lost its art form. So once it loses its form, then it reverts back to being scrap metal again. So I was thinking how do I identify a keli very often? We identify by virtue of, is it a keli lekabala? Is it able to receive? Is it able to receive? I thought to myself, maybe this is the deeper meaning of what the Rebbe is saying, that Moshe kibel, Moshe was a keli, the form of Moshe, that he was defined by Torah, that he received Torah. But maybe until Purim, we weren't a keli, we weren't bikabel, we weren't able to receive. And by virtue of the commitment of Purim, now we're able to receive. Now we become a keli, we become a vessel for Torah. In other words, we changed. Something changed forever on Purim. And the Rebbe even indicates that it affects the generations prior and after Purim. Purim is a paradigm shift. It's a transformative moment in who we are as a nation. And this, my dear friends, is the meaning now. Now we have a whole new look when we look at the pasuk, Kimu v'kibla ha-Yehudim aleihem, v'al zaram v'al anilvim aleihem. Remember how we learned it an hour and 15 minutes ago? And now how you look at these verses, we talked about the eternity. Now these few words, so to speak, you'll never see them the same again. Now you have, as we say, the full layer of meaning that's exposed. And of course, this means that we don't just do what we have to do, but we go beyond the call of duty. We're enthusiastic, we're joyous, we're motivated. It's a whole new world because of Purim. And this embodies the essence of the Yom Tov we call Purim itself, as we'll continue Be'ezrat Hashem to further develop in the upcoming episodes. And now we'll understand in a whole new way the meaning of Lo Yaver, and we'll also be able to appreciate Lihiyes Oisim, to be able to make these days, as we will Be'ezrat Hashem continue to learn in the episodes to come. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you found that uplifting and informative and educational and inspirational and exciting. I hope this changes the way, by the way, we look at Purim. We should look at Purim differently. And when you look at Purim differently, you observe Purim differently. You observe it with joy and gusto and enthusiasm and excitement. You take it seriously. Purim's a serious, very happy day, but a very serious day. It's not a day to be passed over, chas v'shalom. And hopefully, as we prepare and make the commitment to observe Purim yet again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will grant us, in the zchut of our future commitments, will grant us the miracles that we await with the coming of Mashiach. May it be b'mheira u'b'yameinu amen. Thank you again for joining. If you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe and please share with others. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you back. Kol tov.